After a violent landslide tore through the hills of North Carolina, one woman found something no one was ever meant to see. Hidden behind the fallen earth was a secret cave entrance untouched for centuries. What she discovered inside, it wasn't gold, it wasn't bones. It was something far more powerful, and it changed everything. Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, you'll witness a shocking discovery that rewrites one woman's life and might just make you look at your own world differently. But before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. The morning after the storm. The air still smelled of wet earth and pine needles. High in the hills of North Carolina, where the forests climb thick and the roads twist like memory, lived a woman named Amelia. She was 42, quiet by nature, and had spent the last decade alone in a small timber cabin that once belonged to her grandmother. Her hands bore the strength of someone who worked the land chopping wood, planting vegetables, fixing fences before winter. She wasn't running from anything, not really, but she had chosen solitude, like others choose company deliberately, gratefully. The hills around her cabin were steep and old, carved by time and weather. After the storm, part of the slope behind her home had crumbled away in a small landslide. Nothing too dramatic. No trees fell, no structures broken. But something new was exposed. A dark cleft in the hillside that hadn't been there before. At first, she thought it was just a trick of shadow. But as the morning light filtered through the mist and touched the edge of the opening, something shifted in her chest. A pull, quiet, steady, and utterly undeniable. She never expected that taking a single step toward that gap would change everything. Amelia didn't go to the opening right away. She watched it for 2 full days, sipping her coffee from the back porch as the fog rolled in and the trees whispered old secrets. She told herself it was nothing, a broken pocket in the hill from the rain. Maybe a shallow crevice or an animal den. Still, her eyes kept drifting toward it, and something inside her stirred a quiet hum, like remembering a name you'd once forgotten. On the 3rd morning, with the air still damp and heavy with the scent of cedar, she walked to it. The earth was soft beneath her boots, freshly torn and raw, like the skin of something newly opened. The hole gaped in the hillside just above her garden, no more than 3 feet across, veiled in shadow and moss. But standing before it, Amelia could feel it. It wasn't just earth, it felt intentional. She crouched beside it and touched the edge of the opening. The stone beneath the mud wasn't like the rest of the hill. It was smooth, carved, even. Her breath caught in her chest. It wasn't a landslide that made this, it was a reveal. She didn't go inside that day. Instead, she returned to the cabin, pulled out her grandmother's old lantern from the attic, still dusty with age, and spent the evening cleaning it, replacing the wick, checking the hinges like it was something sacred. That night, she barely slept. She dreamt of voices distant and muffled, like whispers through wood. She saw her grandmother standing at the kitchen window, younger than Amelia ever remembered her, saying something she couldn't quite hear. When she woke before dawn, the dream was already fading, but the feeling remained. Something was waiting. At first light, she packed a small satchel, just a thermos of tea, the lantern, a flashlight, and her pocket knife. She didn't tell anyone. Who would she tell? The nearest neighbor was 3 miles down the ridge, and Amelia had lived on her own long enough to trust her gut more than any outsider's opinion. She ducked into the opening just after sunrise. The space was tight at first, the ceiling barely higher than her shoulders. She had to crouch and shuffle sideways, the walls pressing in like clenched fists of stone. But then it widened, and that was when everything changed. The passage opened into a chamber, not a cave, not something wild and random, a room. Amelia stood frozen at the threshold, the lantern light flickering across walls that bore the touch of hands, real hands. The stone was marked with strange lines, loops, symbols she couldn't decipher, but they pulsed with meaning. There were shallow shelves carved into the walls, long vacant, and what looked like soot burn marks where something had once burned. Long ago. The air was colder down there. Still, too still. She didn't say a word. She only moved slowly, every step a negotiation between wonder and fear. At the center of the room was a circular depression in the stone floor, perfectly round and worn smooth. It reminded her of an altar, or maybe a gathering place. She didn't know what to make of it, but her heart pounded as she stepped closer. This wasn't nature. This wasn't random. Someone had made this. Many someones. And they had meant it to be found or hidden. Amelia sat there for a long time, lantern by her side, knees tucked to her chest. Her mind raced, but her body felt strangely at peace, as though some part of her had always known this place was here, like a memory passed through generations, waiting for the right moment to rise. She thought of her grandmother, of the stories she used to tell when Amelia was a child of secret people in the hills, of hidden places and things buried not to be forgotten, but to be kept. She never believed them then, but now she wasn't so sure. When she finally returned to the surface, the sun had dipped low behind the trees. The world looked the same, but she felt irrevocably changed. Her hands were dirty, her knees ached. But her heart, it was wide open. That night, she lit a fire and stared at it long after the flames had gone soft. The wind outside rustled the branches gently, and every sound from the forest sounded just a bit closer than it had the night before. Amelia didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, eyes distant, as if remembering something that hadn't happened yet. She had found something extraordinary, and it was just the beginning. The next morning, the sky was cloudless, the forest unusually still. Amelia stood at the edge of the opening again, the cool breath of earth rising to meet her like a sigh from something ancient. She hesitated for just a second, then ducked inside, lantern in hand. This time, she went deeper. The initial chamber felt familiar now, like the living room of an old friend's home you hadn't seen in years. The air carried the same chill, the same scent of stone and ash. But something was different. As she passed the circular depression in the floor, she noticed footprints. Not hers. They were faint, but unmistakable. A different tread, wider, heavier. They led toward a narrow passage she hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind a cracked section of the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone had been here, recently. Amelia tightened her grip on the lantern, the flame flickering with each breath. For a moment, every instinct screamed for her to turn around, to leave, to bury the hole and pretend none of this had ever happened. But she didn't. She followed the prints. The new tunnel was tighter, winding like a vein deeper into the earth. Her shoulders brushed damp stone, and her boots slid across patches of slick moss. It felt like walking into the belly of something vast and sleeping. After what felt like a mile underground, the tunnel opened again. But this room was different. It was enormous. The lantern's light barely reached the walls, which stretched high and wide in all directions. At the far end, just visible through the gloom, stood columns. Real columns, carved from stone, tall and thick like those of an ancient cathedral. Amelia stepped inside, her every movement echoing. And then she saw it. In the center of the chamber, partially buried in silt and dust, was a door. Stone, like the walls, circular, and covered in symbols. Her knees nearly buckled. It wasn't a door in the modern sense. There was no knob, no hinges. But it was clearly meant to open somehow. The edges were worn smooth from hands. Many hands, over many years. She reached out, touched the cool surface, and felt a pulse like the hum of an old machine still alive beneath layers of sleep. She stepped back, heart pounding. What was this place? Who built it? And why did it feel like it knew her? Amelia crouched beside the stone circle and cleared away more of the dirt. Beneath the dust, more carvings emerged, figures in robes. Stars, hands raised toward the sky. Flames. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Not evil, not sacred, just forgotten. She whispered aloud. "What are you?" The room didn't answer. But something shifted in the air. A whisper too faint to call a sound curled around her ears. It wasn't threatening. It felt like memory, like grief, like longing. And then, behind her, a noise, a footstep. She spun, lantern swinging wide. The shadows leapt and danced against the far wall. "Hello," she called, her voice brittle. Silence. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Amelia's breathing quickened. She stepped toward the sound, her boots crunching against ancient gravel. But no figure emerged. No voice answered. Only her own heartbeat, loud in her ears. She waited. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, cautiously, she turned back to the stone door. As she lifted the lantern once more, she saw something new, an engraving she hadn't noticed before, etched at the very bottom. 3 words, faint but legible. "She who remembers." Her throat tightened. She had no idea what it meant, but it felt personal, like it had been waiting for her. Her hands trembled. She stepped back again, unable to look away from the stone circle, from the names and symbols and echoes pressed into every inch of this forgotten place. The air felt charged now. Not dangerous, not quite safe, but full, awake. Amelia knew this was no longer just about curiosity. She had stepped into a story that hadn't been told in generations. Something ancient had stirred, and whether she was ready or not, she had found it. That night, Amelia couldn't eat. She sat in the old rocking chair beside the window, the lantern now dark and cold beside her. Outside, the forest was cloaked in silence. No wind, no rustling leaves, no call of birds. It felt as though the trees were holding their breath, waiting. She turned the name over in her mind again and again. She who remembers. It echoed inside her, deeper than any echo should go. It wasn't just etched on stone. It was etched in her, somehow, in some unspoken way. The words had always been there like a seed buried deep in her bones, waiting to bloom. And now, something had awakened it. She thought about her grandmother again, how she'd always said the land had a memory. It holds what we forget. She'd whisper. That's why the mountains never speak too loud. They're listening. Back then, Amelia had laughed. But tonight she could almost feel the mountains listening still. As the hours passed, her mind unraveled. The stone door, the engravings, the footprints, that feeling that hum beneath the earth, like standing atop a buried heartbeat. She had never believed in fate or purpose, or destiny. But now she wasn't so sure. Something had called her, not in words, in feeling, and she had answered. By morning, Amelia didn't feel like the same person. She wasn't thinking about chores or errands. She didn't look at her land and see fences to mend or vegetables to pull. She looked at the hills, at the ground beneath her feet, and saw layers. She saw memory. She saw history breathing just below the surface. She wasn't just walking across soil anymore. She was walking across story. She returned to the chamber that afternoon. Slower this time. Not cautious, but reverent. The way someone might enter a church built by forgotten hands. Everything felt changed. The symbols on the walls looked more alive, more purposeful. The grooves in the floor felt like footsteps from people she almost remembered. Her eyes didn't just see lines and stone anymore. She saw intent. At the stone door, she knelt again. It was beautiful. Not polished or ornate, but powerful. It felt like it belonged, not just to the mountain, but to her. As she placed her hand against the carving that read, "She who remembers," something shifted in her chest. A kind of warmth bloomed behind her ribs, not painful, not alarming. Just real. She pressed her forehead gently to the stone, and for a moment, the chamber didn't feel empty. She didn't hear voices. She didn't see visions, but she felt them others. A presence that reached through time and rested quietly beside her. Watching. Waiting. It didn't ask her for anything. It simply acknowledged her. That night, Amelia dreamt of fire. She stood in the great hall with the stone columns, but it was no longer dark. Torches lined the walls, flickering gold and amber. Figures moved among them not clearly, just outlines. Silhouettes. None turned to face her, but none feared her presence. In the center of the room, a woman stood tall, her back to Amelia. She raised her hand and touched the stone door, just as Amelia had done. And when she whispered, her words were carried like wind through leaves. "Keep it. Remember it. Until they're ready again." Amelia woke with tears in her eyes. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew, in her soul, that she had just seen a piece of a story too old for books, a promise passed through bloodlines, held in silence, waiting for someone willing to listen. Someone like her. The change wasn't dramatic. She still fed the chickens, still checked the woodpile, still made tea in the mornings. But everything was different now. She moved through her life with a kind of stillness, as though carrying a sacred truth. She didn't talk to the neighbors. She didn't make a single post online. Not because she was hiding something, but because she was protecting something. The story in the mountain wasn't ready for the world. And maybe the world wasn't ready for it either. But she was ready. And she would remember. Because maybe that's what remembering is, not just knowing, but keeping. Keeping something safe. Keeping something sacred. Until the time is right. It was 3 days later when the letter arrived. Not by mail, not slipped through a crack in the door, but resting on the porch railing like it had been left by the wind. A folded piece of thick parchment, the kind you didn't see anymore. No name, no address, just a small circle, hand-drawn in ink on the outside, the same shape Amelia had seen carved again and again in the chamber beneath the earth. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, there were only 7 words, written in uneven, slightly faded handwriting. "You are not the only one who remembers." She stared at the words for a long time. At first, she felt panic. Someone knew. Someone had been watching her, maybe even following her down into the cave. The footprints, the noise, the presence she felt in the chamber, It hadn't been her imagination after all. But beneath the fear, something else rose relief. She wasn't alone. And then, like a whisper behind her thoughts, another realization surfaced. She was being invited. That night, she returned to the chamber, but not just with her lantern. She carried a notebook, gloves, a second flashlight, and her grandmother's locket, something she hadn't worn in years. It had always given her a strange sense of comfort, even when she was a child. Inside was a tiny sketch, a tree with roots that spiraled down into a circle. She had never understood it. Now she wondered if it was another piece of a map. At the stone door, she paused, laying the locket gently into the carved groove beneath the inscription, "She who remembers." Nothing happened. No shaking earth, no grinding stone. Just silence. But it was a welcoming silence. And then for the first time, Amelia sat down with her notebook and began to draw. She copied the symbols. She mapped the chamber. She wrote what she felt, not just what she saw. The cold of the stone, the pressure in her chest, the weight of being surrounded by something ancient that had been waiting. For her, for anyone. Over the next few weeks, she returned again and again. Every time, she went deeper. New rooms emerged, new carvings, niches in the walls where melted wax still clung like frozen tears, stone benches arranged in circles, a narrow stairwell that spiraled downward, chiseled smooth by time and hands. She never tried to force the stone door open. It wasn't time. She knew that instinctively, like a bird knowing when to fly. Instead, she listened, not to sound, but to the space itself. She sat for hours in the chambers, letting the stillness press against her. And in that silence, she began to hear things not voices, but impressions. Memories not her own, like pages turning in a book she couldn't yet read, but understood. One afternoon, as she traced her finger along a wall etching, she felt a pulse beneath the stone, just one, gentle and warm, not threatening. It felt like being recognized. She whispered into the chamber, "I see you," and something inside her shifted again. A week after the letter, another arrived. This one slipped beneath her front door during the night. No return address, no name, just a single sentence. The door opens with memory, not force. Her breath caught. She folded the note carefully, slid it into the back of her notebook, and sat by the window until morning. Her tea grew cold. The night grew quiet. And still, she waited. Not for someone to arrive, but for the courage to understand what the message truly meant. Because memory wasn't just about the past, it was about connection. She returned to the stone door with only one item, her grandmother's old journal. She'd found it buried deep in a drawer weeks earlier, but hadn't dared open it until now. She sat cross-legged in front of the door and began to read. The journal was filled with poems, recipes, plant notes, and stories. Stories of the mountain, of women who lived alone, of voices in the earth, of rooms below the trees, of something called the Watchers Beneath. And then halfway through the entry that changed everything, there are places meant to be held in silence, not hidden, just protected, until someone with the heart to remember comes along. I think she'll be you, one day. It was dated over 30 years ago. Signed Eleanor, her grandmother. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. She placed the journal beside the locket in the groove at the base of the door. And this time something happened. A sound. Soft, like stone taking a breath. Then a deep, resonant click. The circle began to shift, not opening outward, not sliding aside, but unfolding. A seam appeared along the outer edge. Light, not artificial, but soft, golden, almost alive, seeped from the cracks like morning sun through drawn curtains. Amelia backed away slowly, not in fear, but in awe. The door had heard her. It had waited for her. She stood there, heart pounding, as the passage beyond revealed itself inch by inch. It wasn't just an opening into stone. It was an opening into something meant for her to find. In that moment, Amelia understood what the new opportunity truly was. It wasn't treasure. It wasn't fame. It wasn't even knowledge. It was inheritance. She had not stumbled upon a mystery. She had been called into it. Not to solve it, but to carry it, to remember it, to guard it just as generations before her had done in silence. And now, the silence had broken. Not loudly, not with explosions or proclamations, but gently, through memory, through belonging, through a woman who chose to listen when the world had forgotten how. Amelia didn't enter the doorway that day. She just stood there, heart pounding, staring into the glowing passage as if afraid it might vanish if she blinked. The light inside wasn't like anything she'd seen before. It pulsed gently, like breath, and it warmed her skin without heat, like memory made visible. She stepped back, whispering, "Not yet," because something inside her wasn't ready not to walk forward, but to let go. That night, the wind howled through the trees, the kind of wind that wraps around a house like a question. Amelia sat alone in the kitchen, her grandmother's journal open before her, a cup of untouched tea cooling by her elbow. She turned to a page she hadn't read yet. The cave took something from me once, or maybe it gave me something I wasn't ready to carry. Either way, I never opened the door. I only listened. And that was enough. For a time. But if you're reading this, my sweet girl, maybe your heart is braver than mine was. Tears blurred her vision. She hadn't cried since her grandmother passed, not at the funeral. Not when she inherited the cabin. Not even on the loneliest nights. But this felt like Eleanor was in the room. Sitting across from her. Watching. "I wish you'd told me," Amelia whispered. And then she broke, not with sobs, not loudly, but in the quiet way grief demands, with shoulders trembling, and one hand pressed to her chest, like trying to hold something inside that wanted to shatter. By dawn, she made her decision. She packed a bag not with tools, but with offerings, a photo of her grandmother, a sprig of lavender, dried and brittle, a folded letter she wrote the night before, addressed simply, "To whoever you are," and the locket. She returned to the cave as the first light touched the hill. The door stood open. Not wide, just enough for a person to pass through. She hesitated only once, then stepped inside. The passage beyond curved downward, wrapped in the same soft light that had lured her before. It smelled of moss and ash, of something old and sacred. Her steps echoed softly. The silence wasn't empty, it was alive. She reached a chamber larger than any she had seen before. Pillars rose on either side, and at the center, a raised stone platform shaped like a spiral, the same spiral she had seen etched into the locket, the carvings, the pages of Eleanor's journal. Amelia stepped closer, her hands shaking. And that's when she heard it. A voice. Not out loud, not in the way we speak, but in her mind, like a memory coming home. "You are not the first, but you are the first who stayed." She froze. "I don't understand," she whispered. But the air responded without anger, without confusion, only recognition. Your grandmother listened. She turned back. "You did not." Amelia's breath hitched. Eleanor had been here, maybe even stood in this very room, but she hadn't gone further. She hadn't opened the door, because she had been afraid. No, because she had been waiting. Waiting for Amelia. She climbed the platform slowly, placed the locket and the photo and the letter on the stone, and knelt. She didn't pray, she wasn't sure to whom she would, but she closed her eyes and whispered, "I remember. I don't know what this place is, but I remember the feeling of it. I remember my grandmother's hands, her voice, the stories she never told. I remember being a little girl and thinking the trees could speak. I remember feeling like I belonged here long before I ever knew it existed." She opened her eyes, and the chamber responded, not with sound, with light. It filled the spiral, poured up from the floor like fog catching fire, and danced along the carvings on the wall. Images flickered fleeting, glowing echoes of the past. Figures gathering in silence, hands raised, children laughing, people mourning. A woman tall, strong, placing a hand on the stone door and whispering words Amelia couldn't hear. Amelia watched, tears streaming down her face. Not because it was sad, but because it was true. Because somehow, across time, across silence and soil, she had found a family far older than blood. And they had been waiting? When the light faded, Amelia remained kneeling. She felt hollow and whole, broken and rebuilt. Whatever lay ahead, she knew now that her life would never return to what it was. She wasn't just a woman in a cabin anymore. She was a keeper, a witness, a continuation of something far bigger than herself. She stood slowly, her knees aching, her heart steady, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear of being alone. Because she wasn't. Not anymore. Autumn came early that year. The trees blazed gold and crimson, and the wind carried the scent of turning leaves and damp soil. From the outside, nothing had changed. Amelia still woke with the sun, fed the chickens, chopped wood, sipped tea from the same chipped mug her grandmother once held. But inside everything was different. She no longer saw the land as just a place to live. It was a living story, a layered memory that stretched beyond her lifetime, beyond even her grandmother's. Every breeze that whispered through the trees felt like a voice. Every crack in the stone felt like a line of ancient poetry, left behind by someone who believed someone else would one day return to read it. That someone was her, and she had answered. She didn't speak of the door. Not to the man at the market who asked about the weather, not to the ranger who stopped by with news of a fallen tree, not even to the friend who sent letters once a month, asking if she was still enjoying the mountain life. Some things weren't meant to be explained. Some things were only meant to be kept. But every evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned violet above the ridgeline, she returned to the entrance beneath the hill. Sometimes she entered. Sometimes she just sat outside it, her fingers resting on the cool earth. And always, always she listened. It wasn't about uncovering more rooms or decoding more symbols anymore. She wasn't trying to solve anything. She was simply keeping watch. Like her grandmother had. And in doing so, she found something no map could ever promise. Peace. One evening, as the light faded behind the hills, Amelia brought with her a small wooden box. Inside it, folded gently like an offering, was a note written in her own hand. It wasn't long, just a few lines. If you found this, maybe you were called too. Don't rush. Listen first. This place isn't about finding. It's about remembering. She placed it just inside the entrance, tucked between a stone and a root. She didn't know if anyone would ever find it. But then again, she hadn't known she would be the one to find this place, either. The days moved on. The world spun forward, loud and fast and always hungry for answers. But in her quiet corner of the mountain, Amelia moved gently through each day, anchored by a secret that wasn't a burden, but a blessing. She started planting herbs she'd never grown before, things her grandmother used to mention in passing. She began painting again, something she hadn't done since college. The spirals and symbols found their way into her brushstrokes. Abstract and sacred, she began living, not just surviving. Because once you've stood in the presence of something ancient and true, once you've been chosen by silence, it changes you. It teaches you to see what others don't. It teaches you to honor what others forget. One night, a storm rolled in, the kind that rattles windows and bends the trees. As lightning flickered across the sky, Amelia stood by the window, locket in hand, heart still. She smiled, not because she wasn't afraid of the storm, but because she finally understood something her grandmother had written all those years ago. Some storms don't come to destroy. They come to reveal what's been waiting beneath the surface. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the cave was. Not a place of danger, but of invitation. A sacred truth buried in silence, waiting for someone with the heart to hear it. And Amelia, she had heard it. She had remembered. She had become the one who listens. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys don't take us across continents or through crowds. Sometimes they take us deeper into the soil beneath our feet, into the bones of memory, into the places our ancestors kept warm for us in silence. And if you ever feel lost, truly lost, listen to the quiet. You might hear the earth remembering you. Amelia's story is not about adventure in the grand, explosive sense. It's about courage in stillness, about how listening, truly listening to the land, to memory, to the whispers passed down through generations, can lead us to something far more powerful than gold or fame. It's about carrying something sacred in a world that's forgotten how. In the end, the cave didn't just open a passage beneath the earth, it opened something inside her. And that's what remembering does. It awakens us. It connects us. It gives meaning to places we once walked past without seeing. The story teaches us this. Sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest truths. And the world changes not when we shout louder, but when we remember deeper. The end. Up next, 2 more unforgettable stories that will stay with you long after the credits roll. Click to keep listening with us, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe some stories are meant to be remembered.